Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. This is such a lovely, fun-filled crowd, so we're super excited. My name is Amali, and I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. Before we start, I just want to point out a few logistics of how tonight's event is going to go. So first off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We'll be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end, so please start thinking of questions to ask. After the talk tonight, Chloé will be signing and personalizing books at the desk behind us near the side door. And of course, we have additional copies of Easy Beauty and Uncanny Valley available to purchase for my colleagues Denise and Erica in the back. And of course, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Easy Beauty online using the link in the live stream description. All right, so with all that in mind, we are so very excited to introduce Chloé Cooper-Jones and Anna Wiener, who are here celebrating the release of Chloé's debut memoir, Easy Beauty. Chloé weaves together memory, observation, experience, and aesthetic philosophy to examine the myths underlying our standards of beauty and desirability, and interrogates her own complicity in upholding those myths. With incredible depth, passion, humor, and intelligence, Chloé writes about identity, disability, motherhood, Beyonce, and we simply can't wait to hear what more she has to say tonight. Chloé Cooper-Jones is a philosophy professor and freelance journalist who was a finalist for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in feature writing. Her work has appeared in publications including GQ, The Verge, Vice, Book Forum, New York Magazine, and The Believer, and has been selected for both the Best American Travel Writing and the Best American Sports Writing. She lives here in Brooklyn, New York. And as I mentioned before, Chloé is joining conversation with Anna Wiener, who is a contributing writer to The New Yorker, where she covers Silicon Valley and tech culture. She is the author of Uncanny Valley and lives in San Francisco. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Chloé and Anna.
Andrew, you have my book, I think. Also, can I be annoying and ask people to sit in these empty seats so I can take a picture and it looks like, Thanks. Instead of obnoxious. I'm just going to read a tiny bit, but first, can I take a picture of you? You're all so beautiful. Dan's taking a picture of me taking a picture. Okay. Look happy. Thank you. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Chloé. This is kind of sexy. It's like run a morning talk show.
I know. Should I just talk like this?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Would you like to open with a reading?
I'm going to read just a little bit. Yeah, I didn't know what I was going to read. I kind of debated. Some of this book is some of this book is sort of heavy, and some of it is philosophy, which we could turn this into philosophy 101 class. But my mother really wanted to be here, and she couldn't be here. And I know she's really sad that she can't be here, and I know she's watching. And so I thought I would take this opportunity to read the one section where I make fun of her. So it's actually toward the end of the book. And the only thing you need to know is that throughout the book I travel alone, and at the very end I finally travel with my family. So this is from that section. And the chapter is called Miami Beach, which is where we are. My mother is hungry. Order whatever you want, I tell her. I'll just go upstairs and eat some nuts I packed, she says. Just ask them for a menu, I say. Ask who for a menu? I point to some guys in sunglasses standing behind a tiki bar, the roof of which is thatched with fake plastic grass. It is autumn, 3 days before Wolfgang's 7th birthday, which we'll celebrate here at this oceanfront hotel in Miami. We've managed to drag my mother along too. It is our first true family vacation. I'll just go to the back to the room and just eat some nuts I packed, my mother says again. She's happy to be with us, but also a little miserable. She does not want to go on vacation to relax. She wants to go on vacation to ride more horses, preferably hard to ride horses on a treacherous trail in Montana or New Mexico. We sit stiffly in pool chairs. Kate's laughing the hardest because she knows my mom really well. My best friend is like 35 years, so she's like, yep. Sorry. We sit stiffly in pool chairs. I signal for a menu and a waiter walks one over, but hesitates when he sees my scowling mother. Don't mess this up for me. Mom, I say, nudging her. She limply reaches for a menu. She flips it back and forth in her hand, reading both sides several times. I'll just go for the nuts I brought. Okay, I say. Fine, she says, and she orders a coconut smoothie. She watches Wolfgang. He flails about in the shallow end. My mother's smoothie arrives on a silver platter. This and the pile of manicured fruit arranged on the top horrifies her. She flicks the paper umbrella aside like a gnat. What is this? It's your coconut smoothie, I say. A ridiculous coconut smoothie, she says, correcting me. Oh, you can't bear it. No, she says. Not a chore in sight. You're making fun of me, she says. She sips her smoothie. You think I'm too country for this nice hotel. I think you can only enjoy things acquired through arduous labor. There's a wheel in your head that can't stop spinning. She says, I finally stopped looking around for papers to grade. Took 10 years of retirement, but finally I stopped looking around for them. Now you're the one always grading papers. It was true. I had a stack of them on my lap, but it stopped working after I'd lost my pen to the crevices of my lounge chair. Wolfgang floats by on a white unicorn. Another kid swims over to Wolfgang and grabs him by the leg and flips him off the floaty. A previous me seethes with rage, ready to hate any stranger in our midst. But now I think only of Wolfgang, who is completely fine, but bobs up, eyes wild, searching for me. Help me! You're okay, I say. Just swim, try to swim. Wolfgang is too scared to see how safe he is, still in the shallow end. All he has to do is straighten his legs and he'll be on solid ground. But he's lost to panic and starts to sink. Andrew shakes himself free from a half nap, levitates above his lounger, and dives in. My mother says, not all songs need covers. The resort has hidden speakers everywhere, and a reggae Karma Police is playing. She says, oh God, I need a break from, and she gestures to the palm trees, this party. Reggae Take On Me plays next. She says, this nice resort needs to learn to leave some songs alone. Mom, what? She says. Where are all your chores? Her horse, Jimmy, had died the week before. She says, Jimmy couldn't eat hay toward the end. I'd mix him up beet pulp. I'd cut a crack and a carrot and shove his pills in that way. I made his dinner special every night and took it down to him and tucked him in, and now he's gone, and I'll never get to do that again. I'm sorry about Jimmy, Mom. She says, I knew Jimmy wouldn't last forever. I knew that. She looks at me, lost in a thought. Her eyes close, her face falls into a deep frown. It is awful, she says, shaking her head in disbelief. what they've done to this song. And the Hidden Speakers play a reggae rendition of Walking After Midnight.
Woo!
Hey. I love that section, and it has prompted some questions that I wanted to ask you about genre. The book, I mean, I think you sort of undersold it by saying all you need to know is I travel a lot in the book. Here I am traveling again. The book, there are a lot of sort of different genres within the book. There's memoir, there's travel writing, there's some sports writing, there's sort of philosophical inquiry, and then there are other sort of narratives, I would say narratives of disability, of motherhood, of class that are woven in, all of which feels totally fresh and new to me. I think it's beautifully written, and it's also completely original. And I'm curious how you thought about genre, or how you thought about existing narratives, and whether you consider yourself as writing within any of them, or against any of them, and sort of how you thought about that. If you're ready for the fifth clause of the question, in terms of structuring the book, but also in developing the voice.
Well, I think that's 6 great questions. So I was really lucky in a sense, or I don't know, if you hate the book, then I was not lucky. But I didn't think that this would ever be a book. And it started as a personal project to myself. I was traveling a lot for journalism and for research on a dissertation and for really a lot of other reasons. And I just decided, because of something that had happened, that I was just gonna, while I was on these trips, not pretend I wasn't disabled, which was something I did for a long time. I wouldn't talk about disability. I wouldn't ever communicate with anyone about it. I didn't really have a language to explain it. And so on these travels, the book takes place about 18 months. That's the present of the book. And so on each of these trips, I just made this conscious decision just for myself to really think about what it meant to be a disabled body moving around the world, and to be in spaces that typically felt closed off to me. And as I was doing this, I was just writing in my journals, and I was writing about what I observed. I was writing very honestly about my body and pain. I was writing about the ways that strangers were interacting with me, but I was also doing a PhD in philosophy, so I was reading a lot of philosophy. So I would be thinking about what I had read and how what I was reading was informing the way that I could think about any sort of problems. And so in my journals, I could just sort of reach out into all these different sources, the present, my own past, the theory I was reading, the conversations I was having with my friends and strangers, and I could kind of weave these all together into, the consciousness, like actually processing a problem in real time. And maybe that just felt really necessary once this became a book, to hold on to that. But then I think the second part of your question is like, what genres I'm sort of writing into. And I grew up really fascinated by travel writers. I love to travel, and I read a lot of really classic travel narratives. And in all of those narratives, in the vast majority of those narratives, they were white men of means who either didn't have children or had children that nobody brought up. And they were all men who would like have a thought and then be like, gosh, I have to think about this thought. I have to go to a mountain alone, or I have to go to the desert. I have to go on a boat and think these thoughts. And everyone around them was like, great idea, that's amazing. You should definitely do that. And nobody was like, what about your responsibilities or your kid? Or no. They were just like, you're brilliant, go put your brain out in the world and then come back and tell us the secrets that you've learned. And I noticed that women didn't get to do that as often. And I noticed that mothers didn't get to do that, period, without a lot of judgment. And then I didn't know any disabled mothers who were just sort of struggling with their suitcases around, Europe, and I just thought, I'll do that. And part of that was like, I really wanted both literally to put my body in places where it didn't seem to belong, but I also wanted to more abstractly or implicitly like put my body in narratives that it didn't seem to belong in either.
How did you think about that when sort of constructing the character of yourself in the book? Yeah. And we were speaking earlier on the phone about our mutual ambivalence about the genre of memoir, but I think we can probably agree that even when writing personally, you are still developing a character of yourself, sometimes a caricature of yourself, but you are still, very consciously creating a sort of a protagonist. How did you think about kind of pulling in what you were just doing in your life into something that would be read by strangers?
Well, so yeah, I think sometimes with that label memoir, people are like, okay, so you start when you're born and then you tell us everything that ever happened to you, which nobody likes ever. And I wasn't going to do. So just to talk about my mother again for a second, when I started teaching for the first time, my mother is a teacher, and when I started teaching for the first time, I had this idea, which is a weird idea because this would never have flown with my mother, where I wrote like 100 questions about the art of teaching, and I sat down with her and I was like ready to interview her for hours, and I asked her all these questions, and she just like listened very annoyed. And then she just said, okay, here's the only piece of advice I'm going to give you. Just have a point. And I have carried that into everything I really try to think about that. So with this book, it's like there's so much about my life that's not in this book. There's so much that's boring that would be totally irrelevant. And there's also I talk about my husband, my son, my mother, my father, some people in this room. Hi, there's me. Thanks, babe. And I don't tell you everything about them either. I try to have a point. So the point that I really wanted to put forward in this book was this struggle for me between this easy place for me to go in my mind, which is a place of retreat. It's also a very highly idealized and romanticized space. It's a space in which both I can do a lot of thinking, which is very powerful or gives me a lot of agency, but because it's this abstract and idealized and romanticized space, it's also a place where I'm capable of avoiding the hard realities of my life. And that was something I very much learned from my father. And then my mother, maybe you learned, she's like a very, hardworking farmer teacher who's very like a genius at integrating the hard realities into her conception of the world. And so I wanted to really write a book about a person, me, who's very seriously struggling between those two authentic parts of herself, and what it meant to not lose either side of those parts, but to come to a sort of peace with them. And the urgency is that I have a son who I need to show up for every single day, and so I can't always stay in this abstracted and idealized and separated and romantic space. But that space also gives me my sense of who I am as a person and artist, and it's where I also feel like a real communion with beauty, and so I don't want to lose that. So I hope that feels like actually a very relatable struggle, that's something we're all sort of dealing with. And so in that way, the book is less about me per se, but is more about that question and navigating that threshold. And the parts that are about me are just the sort of specific corner or that little tiny area of hopefully what feels like a very relevant question to other people.
One of the things that I was thinking about on the walk over here was the way that you use humor in the book. And everything we've talked about so far has been a little heavy, but the book is deeply funny. And I mean, as you probably can tell, just listening to Chloé talk. But sometimes humor is used as a sort of dissociative technique, as a way of pushing people away, or kind of skirting the edges of something more serious. And it doesn't feel like that's how it's deployed in the book. It actually seems really, really elegant to me. And I'm curious how you thought about humor in this book, and how you sort of, whether if you're drawing from journals, whether that's sort of how you write naturally, or if it's something you added in later for levity. How did you kind of think of the role of humor in this book?
Well, I think it's really smart to say, humor can be a deflecting thing. And I think just like when I'm talking about this sort of retreated mental space, having both a positive side and a negative side, and part of the struggle is finding that threshold. I think that's true of so many other things. So it can be true of humor, right? Humor can be, on one hand, on one side of the threshold, a way of not telling the truth, right? Or getting people to look away from you or look away from the truth. But I think on the other side, if you're really, really telling the truth about anything, it's probably very funny, including the worst things that have ever happened to you. Like sometimes have a deeply absurdist or darkly comic moment. And I just found like the more I looked at those moments, the more clear-eyed I was, or the more honest I was. Even moments where I felt like people were cruel or unkind to me, they were also like very funny too. And I just thought, like, I don't want to tell a version of this where it's like, oh, I'm so sad, like, oh, these people are mean to me. Like, I wanted to be like, these people are weird. This like interaction's weird, like it's stressful. And that's like kind of funny and also very human. And so I think that was really what I was trying to do as much as possible.
There's also a lot of self-deprecating humor. There's a great scene where you're at a concert or a show in Italy, on sort of amphitheater style, and there develops in your mind like a crazy dynamic between you and the person sitting in front of you, who seems to be passing back a glass of wine. And like this is just like the psychological fraughtness of this interaction is off the charts. But it turns out that actually he's trying to pass it to a friend sitting behind you, and it had nothing to do with
And I
you.
drink it.
I'm curious how you sort of thought about making yourself also like a comic figure in certain moments. I don't think that is the overall character in the book, but you know, you do kind of sacrifice yourself up at these junctures that feel sparing, but also like they add a lot of balance. And I'm curious how you thought about that as part of the kind of persona that you were developing on the page.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm being self-deprecating. I'm just like telling you the truth of my like idiocy sometimes. Like the thing about this like dynamic between the clear-eyed ability to look at the hard facts of reality and then the romantic side is that I don't like balance those well, right? Like I balance those badly, and that's like the struggle of the book. So there are all these sections in which I'm on so far on the romantic side that I'm like losing touch with what's happening in front of me. So I'm sitting in Rome, and it's like it had been so hot, and finally it's evening, and I'm in front of Caracalla, and it's so beautiful, and I'm seeing this opera, and I'm looking up at the stars, and I'm going like, here I am, like in the world, like life is so beautiful. And then this gorgeous Italian man with his friends are looking at me, and they're smiling, and they hand me this glass of wine, and I go, of course that would happen. You know, they see how charming and lovely I am, and I drink this wine and look at the stars, and I have these thoughts that like spiral out to God, and he's like, can you just pass it to someone else, you know? But the point is like that romantic side of myself can really, on one hand it has these positive things, but the other side is like narcissism, right? Like that you are the special center of the universe, and that all the beautiful things are happening to you, or like they're all part of your special story or something. And if I wasn't honest about that, then I think the point that I'm trying to make is lost, right? And I also am asking my readers to kind of think about that in themselves. So if I'm asking you to think about that I just did this thing where these other writers were like, my book is here to implicate you as the reader. And I was like, I think my book is also meant to implicate me. like I'm implicated in all these bad things, or not bad things, but maybe just human things and flawed things. And so I really want my readers to feel like I'm doing this with you. Like I'm struggling with these things with you. This is not about things that you're doing to me, but they're things about like, so those moments of self-deprecating humor they're not about putting me down, or I hope they actually make me seem more relatable or alive or real, you know?
Yeah, I think that they do. I mean, I think it feels very natural. Like it's weird that I'm pulling it out to talk about in an isolated way because it feels like a very natural part of the.
Yeah, you picked like the part where I'm so dumb.
Teams can change.
She's like, tell us about how dumb you are in this book. Because the jacket copy's like Pulitzer, PhD.
I think it's
Everyone knows the
charming.
reality is something else.
They're hidden in that hybrid question that I launched us with, which, sorry for that, but you handled that with all the grace of someone who's experienced at being a professor. Where you're like, I think what you're trying to say is this thing that I have a great answer to already. But I'm curious about structure because it's an unusually structured book. I couldn't figure it out. It felt, it reads so smoothly, but it's actually quite sophisticated, I think, and I'm curious how you, I mean, I know you'll say, like, I went on these different trips, but there's like...
Anna's so sick of me already. My daughter's gonna be like, oh. Go ahead, sorry.
There's like an elegance to it that feels like you must have worked incredibly hard to put it together, and if you didn't just lie and make something up. But how did you edit the book? How did you sort of think about how it would read?
No, I did really work hard at the structure. And I think I worked really hard on the structure because structure is not something that comes intuitively to me. So I think as a writer, if you've fallen in love with writing, it's probably because some things feel easier than others, or some people just have such a gift with language or character or plot. And for me, I felt like structure was the thing I really struggled with. So I spent so much time thinking about it. And what I really wanted the structure to do was, and I said this a little bit before, but feel authentically like a mind processing a real problem. And I don't process real problems in a linear way. I don't process problems being like, well, I was born here and then this thing happened, this thing. Like, I process problems where I'm like in a moment and then I'm thinking about, why I'm reacting in a weird way. And then that reminds me of, something from my childhood or something I'm reading or something I'm seeing and so that just felt honest to me. But of course you have to be really careful with that because nobody actually really wants to see the jumble, the true jumble inside your mind. And so I was really lucky to have like the greatest editor in all of the world, which is Lauren Wien, who's here, who I think really saw the thing I wanted to do, the ambitious structural thing that I wanted to do, and wanted to make sure that we hit that goal as hard as possible. So I think that's really crucial. Like you can't do that alone. Like you have to have the right person to be in a dialogue to say, is this landing? Am I losing you? Is this getting disorganized? Or is this all speaking to this thing about how the consciousness actually moves around in the world? And luckily, I just had incredible partners, both in Claudia first, my agent Claudia Ballard, who read it before anyone else, and then Lauren. So that's credit to them for sure.
Well, I think you need to speak about Richard Serra because that's
Richard Serra.
That there's something about that informs the structure too, the kind of negative streaks and all that. But we don't have to talk about that.
I think we should talk about that.
Okay, yeah. So, so part of the thing that I was really inspired by is the philosopher Iris Murdoch. I'm gonna get to Sarah, but it's the philosopher and novelist Iris Murdoch, who has this idea that the way we see is informed by concepts, and if our concepts change, then the way we see changes, and if the way we see changes, then our behavior can change, right? So she really believed that you could think about things until you could see them differently, and if you could see them differently, then you could behave differently. And so throughout the whole book, there's so many moments in which I'm just isolating perception shifts, where I'm just really thinking about, well, I mean, even the example of the men handing me the drink and then it's being this big perception. So that happens all the way through the book. And the explicit project is that I want to change something about my behavior in order to be a better parent. And so I go out and seek beauty as a way of hopefully, and this is also from Murdoch, this belief that seeking beauty can give us reprieve from our own, she says, fat, relentless ego, our own sort of obsessive ego. So I thought, well, I'll test this hypothesis and I'll go out and think about whether or not the experience of beauty can shift my perceptions. And if they can shift my concepts, and if they can shift my concepts, they can shift my perceptions and my behavior. The implicit project is that I want to shift the concepts of disability. So if I ask you all to spend 288 pages with me in my mind and in the life of a disabled person, then maybe I can give you a slightly better concept. If I can give you a better concept, then you can see differently, and if you see me differently, you'll behave differently. And then the Richard Serra sculpture, I don't know if you guys have seen these. I specifically write about the ones that are in Dia Beacon, and I made Isaac go with me. And those are sort of the manifestation, I think, of this more abstract concept, because Richard Serra makes these gigantic sculptures, and they're called the torqued ellipses, and they're kind of mathematically impossible shapes. So as he was making them, it kept breaking and breaking, and then finally he figured out the sort of way of torquing these shapes. So when you walk inside of these sculptures, your mind wants to auto-complete like what you're going to see next, but the shape that you're inside is mathematically impossible. You've never seen it. So literally every single step inside the sculpture reveals a thing that is perceptually sort of jarring and disorienting a little bit, and kind of scary, I think, honestly. And like the light shifts because the walls kind of move in and out. And I think that if you can be in a situation like that, where that perceptual shift and that jarring and that disorientation is kind of exciting to you, then that's a form of beauty that is really hard to access, but is quite rewarding. And so in a lot of ways, I was really inspired by that structure, and I wanted, every sort of passage of the book or every sort of chapter to just keep pushing the perceptions and to keep them shifting and shifting in sometimes a disorienting way. But my hope is that you'll trust me enough or be patient with me enough that it'll pay off, or I don't know. But was that the answer I was supposed to give? I put a lot of thought into it. I worked really hard on it.
One of the perceptual shifts that has stuck with me is that at the beginning of the book you talk about, sort of recount the circumstances of your own birth, not like in an insufferable Northern California way, in a simple way. And by the end of the book, this comes up with your mother, and she offers you this very straightforward corrective, where she's like, "That's not how it happened at all. That's not how I felt at all," and it's incredibly moving, and it made me wonder how you kind of approach the project of like research into yourself and into your family history, and how you decided, those are always, obviously that kind of research accrues and your perception shifts with every new piece of information that you learn. How did you decide sort of where to hold it, and what to weave in?
Well, so again, going back to this idea of the divide between like the sort of romantic and idealized space and the more practical space, is that my father was someone who wrote a lot of stories, and he told a lot of stories, and he left behind like some, letters that were very grandiose, and he told me all these great stories about my birth, which I just never questioned in a lot of ways, or about his life in Nepal, which is where we lived for the first few years of my life. And I just never questioned these stories. And then when I started working on the book, I would write them down, and then I would talk to my mom, and then she would just be like, "Oh, that's all wrong. Like this is so," but I'd already written it, like in the book. So throughout the book, she's just constantly interrupting me, being like, "That's just totally false." And so I really thought about reconstructing my family history in that way of like a very active collision of the very romantic, idealized stories that functionally were lies from my father, but were really good. So one is like, he said like my mother's water broke, and then he got on a motorcycle, and then he put my mother on the motorcycle, and she was backwards on the motorcycle, her hair was flowing, and they went down the streets of Nepal, and they, or we were in Bangkok, so we went down the streets of Bangkok, and then I was born, and my mom was like, none of that happened. She was like, I walked. She was like, this cabbie tried to rip us off, and I just walked, And so in the book, I have my father's story, and I'll tell it like it's true. And then my mother's always sort of, serving as this reality corrective. So I wanted every single thing to aim at my point, even the way that I would recount the parts of my own personal history.
Other than Claudia and Lauren, did you have readers while you were writing? Were you sharing the work with people who were in the book before it was done? Did you? I'll leave it there.
Well, there's some people I still hope never read it. Two of my best friends, Kate and Iris, they just read it 5 minutes ago. I think I went and gave them very much in the book. No, I didn't want anyone to. I don't want to talk to anyone about it. This is such a weird thing. I had some really smart readers. So my friend Rachel Aviv read it first, and my friend Justine Vanderloon read it. My friend Travis, who's here, read it. But I kept it really close. My husband read it. I kept it very, very close. And part of it was just some of it's so vulnerable that actually the people who know me best, I don't want to have a conversation with them about it because it's they're going to really know all the sort of sensitive parts about it. But I was really, really lucky to have some brilliant early readers. So.
Do you want to talk at all about the sort of genre of memoir overall? We could skip that too. We were discussing earlier, is it debased?
Well, you wrote a memoir, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have any moments with? So Anna wrote a brilliant memoir, Uncanny Valley, which is called a memoir. And did you have any moments where you were like, let's call it something else? Let's call it autofiction. Because people respect autofiction, even though it's memoir. Yeah.
I did think about writing it as fiction, but there's so much my book is about working in Silicon Valley in the 2010s, working in tech and living in San Francisco, and there's so much in the book that if it were fiction, it would be a little on the nose. Even as nonfiction, it's on the nose. So I felt that it just wasn't suited to fiction because it would either be sort of misunderstood as satire, which I feel I'm really ambivalent about satire about the tech industry right now, or it would be misunderstood as really bad fiction. So yeah, I think that was sort of that was an easy question to answer. I mean, it's called Uncanny Valley, a memoir, in part because I have to say I think it's a publishing industry. There's some pressure to have a subtitle. I think in the UK, my book didn't sell super well in hardcover in the UK. And so for the paperback, sorry, this is some real industry. I don't know if I can talk about this. So we added a subtitle so that it was less confusing for the paperback. And the subtitle is something like Seduction and Disillusionment in Startups in San Francisco. It's almost SEO optimized. Or it's sort of like an undergraduate thesis or something. And I wrote it. I wrote that subtitle. I take full credit. But yeah, I think that the genre, one of the things that I have struggled with having written a memoir is is the expectation that you're writing for redemption or for sympathy or pity. And that wasn't really my aim at all. And I found that it was interesting to read the response from some people who were like, I found it really hard to feel bad for this narrator. And I was like, yeah, good. That's not the objective. And I think that there are some certain expectations that come with memoir that make it hard to write in that mode. And also the expectation that, you disclose and that it's all on the page and that your life is an open book off the page. like the sort of extra textual analysis that can happen with memoir, I think is fascinating and unsettling. Not happy pub day. But I think that mostly, I guess, sorry to close. I think that my ambivalence about the genre has more to do with the sort of baggage around it than writing in that genre, which I often love. What's your damage with memoir?
Well, I did for a while wish that I could just call it like Easy Beauty, some stuff I'm thinking about, because I think that's what the book feels like, right? Like, and Lauren, who wrote, this publisher's letter, is like, it's a travelogue, and it's a love story, and it's a philosophy thing, and it's also about beauty, and you're gonna learn some stuff about art. And it's like every time you add a clause, you're disappointing some people. And it's also really hard for me to succinctly talk about it. And I did have a moment where I was like, I don't want to call it this, or I'm not going to teach people enough, or I'm not going to change enough, or whatever. But there were two things that sort of shifted my thinking on it. One is that, and I know we're both big fans of Vivian Gornick, and she wrote in her book, The Situation of the Story, which is about memoir writing, that all you need to, well, she really felt like what you needed to do was think about what it meant to move from a slightly less coherent self to a slightly more coherent self. And so I thought, that's the only thing I need to do, is just see if I can show a reader how I move from a slightly less coherent self or slightly less self-aware self to slightly more. And the book is firmly in that struggle. So it ends right where I just start to get a clue, and it's like, I'm out. And so I don't end the book like a fully integrated great person. I'm not here as that either. So that, I really admired that idea, and I thought I loved that as like a core concept of what memoir could be. But then the other thing is, to be a disabled person is to live a fairly isolated life in a lot of ways. Like, I'm surrounded by so many people, but there's so much of my life that people can't understand. And I really don't want to further other people. I don't want to put more layers of separation between myself and other people or the reader. I want to really say, like, this is a whole life, and it's a life in which I make a lot of mistakes, and it's a life in which I have complicated desires, but it's a whole real life, and the fact that I'm disabled is a very big part of that, but it isn't the whole part of that. And my hope is that the reader can feel very close to me, not just because I want that for myself, but because I think the more we see ourselves in a relationship to our bodies and the spectrum of disability, the better the lives of disabled people will be. So it was really, really important to me to not put a fake, genre construct on top of that and call it autofiction or like songs of my feelings or what, just ditties, an inquiry, a critique of assholes in Rome. I was like, this is a memoir, I'm going to tell you some stuff. It's me. It's really me, and there's no line and there's no boundaries. And that was me asking people to come a little closer, but I can't do that unless I'm willing to take a step toward them.
I think, as my last question, something that comes up in the book, just hearing you talk about sort of the distance that can grow between people, between you and other people, and trying to bridge that a little bit. There's a concept, or in the book you write about sort of acts of grace. I don't think you don't belabor this idea, but it comes up, that people extend grace to one another. And curious how I realized, embarrassingly as we sat down, that I called your book an act of grace, which it is, and I definitely got that from the book. I'm curious how you think about acts of grace and writing as an act of grace.
Well, I think so. I think this is really common for everybody. This is definitely not specific to disability, but it's really common for someone to take a often visual fact about you, and isolate that visual fact and have a set of ideas about that visual fact, and then never have a second thought about you. That's just like having a brain and having to deal with a lot of strangers. Like, there's actually, I don't mean that in a critical way. Like, the mind has to encounter so much of the unknown that it's part of the way that we can move through the world to try to pick out information, make really quick leaps of judgment about the information, and then move on. It, however, can feel very dehumanizing when that happens. And so one thing my mother says to me in the book is, she says, you know, I really want to protect you from this fact that some people are never going to have a second thought about you. And so I think the act of, you know, if we can call it an act of grace, which you did on the cover, is that I do talk about things that are hard, and that are, I do talk about people who have said or done less graceful things, but it's really important for me, especially by the end, to, no matter what is said to me or no matter what I encounter, to never treat another person as though they aren't worthy of a second or third or fourth thought. So by the end of the book, you know, there's still a difficulty that arises, but I don't want to reduce anybody down to their worst day or their worst thought or their worst interaction with the strangers. So I think that's just something that's so valuable to me, like something I really wish other people would give to me. So I felt like I had to make sure that I was willing to do the work to give that to other people. That's it. Right? Yeah. Thank you. Those are really good questions, Anna.
Thank you. Sorry, I was wondering if I should do something corny and be like, and you did. She did. Great. Okay. Sorry, I got chatty. Does anyone have any questions? Welcome.
Chloe. How is it for you as a writer to open up about your emotions, about sharing them in the book, knowing that other people are going to have to know?
Yeah, that's a good question. Someone must be raising you really well. I don't, Wolfgang, do you have a thought about how people do that? Do you have an instinct about how people learn to do that?
It's kind of just, if I had to say, I guess I'd just say it's kind of a stupid amount of bravery.
I can't top that. That's a perfect answer. And inadvisable stupidity that can be reframed as bravery. Yeah, that's good. I will say, again, to give credit to my editor, Lauren, there were a lot of points in the book where I think I would circle a very vulnerable or uncomfortable thought, and I would think that I could kind of get away with it, and I would give it to Lauren, and she'd go, you're not telling the truth here. And I'd be like, oh shit. And then I would rewrite it, and she'd go, I don't know how to fix this for you. You're gonna have to just actually tell the truth. And I'd be like, okay. And she just never let me off the hook, and she really pushed me, and I was able to be pushed because I was so supported. So I had that incredible base of support. And so for those really tender or vulnerable or scary moments, I just had her holding my hand through all of it, as well as my family. So thanks, Will. Anybody else? We can just go to the bar now.
Questions?
Oh yeah, Giddy.
I should have just asked you this myself at some point. But sometimes I feel like philosophy is a prose-style killer, and depending on the kind of philosophy you study, the damage can be different. But I feel like your book has a lot in it, a lot of philosophy in it, but it kind of bears its reading really lightly. You don't feel weighed down by it. I was wondering how you kind of protected and nourished your own prose style while throughout your like professional and academic journey, and how you managed to take so many good things from it, but none of the bad habits?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the professor I wanted to always impress the most, who I was the most scared of at the Graduate Center when I was doing my PhD, is here. And he's in the back. And I'm still scared of him. But I think he and my friend Dan, who's here, who's also a brilliant philosopher, and a few of my friends, really helped me always remember that philosophy should feel like a very urgent set of like relevant human questions. And that it should not be isolated away in sometimes necessary, but not in this context, necessary jargon or sort of distancing language. I mean, the whole basis of philosophy is people walking around being like, what is this? What am I? What is good? What am I doing here? What does it mean to love someone? What is justice? I mean, these are all just, I think, the questions that are actually in all of these books. That surround us right now. And so I think that was the thing that was so important to me whenever I brought in theory or philosophy, is that it served that urgency. And I think one of the great things about philosophy is that sometimes it can just give you a word or a phrase that gives you a little bit of language that helps you control an abstract thought a little bit better. So I would just try to make sure that every little bit of philosophy that comes into the book is a tool for better thinking, myself or for anyone else, and that it was never a way of trying to prove to people that I'd read Kant, you know, who cares? So yeah, I just wanted to really hold on to that urgency, and I was lucky that I had great professors and colleagues that helped me as I was doing my own academic work, just really never lose sight of that. Let's go to the bar. Are we done?
Can we do one last question real quick?
No.
It's from me, unless someone has their hand up. Tell us about the stress.
Oh yeah. Thanks. Also, my best friend Kate did my makeup, and my best friend Iris did my hair. So, I love an ambitious concept, and so I had this idea that on my book tour, all of my dresses and all of my outfits would like reference classical images of beauty, and it would be like a theme. And I didn't get that far because like I don't like shopping and it's expensive. But I got this far, which was that I wanted to reference Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and so I'm like covered in very impractical seashells, but I like it, and we're gonna take it to the bar. So let's go.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I just want to reiterate that Chloe will be signing books in the back desk, and there's a door back there that you can exit out of. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Anna and Chloe, for such a wonderful discussion. And if you haven't gotten your copy of the DVD yet, you can go ahead and do so in the desk at the back. All right, that's all for me. Thank you all so much.